welcome to our Good Grief workshop. For those that might not be familiar with Good Grief, we are an all-in-one platform that supports people navigating caregiving, end-of-life planning, and loss. And we do so by providing helpful guides, checklists, workshops such as these, access to vetted experts, and a supportive community of other people that have been in your shoes and know how to help. I'm Veronica Polito. I'm the founder of Good Grief, and I'm really grateful that you're here for our session on what it is, what is a death doula and what is their role. Today's session is led by Aisha Dull. She is a certified death doula who supports individuals and families through serious illness, end of life, and the transitions that follow. Aisha, I've had the great pleasure of getting to know her over the last couple weeks, and she truly brings a rare combination of steadiness, warmth, and true practical guidance. She helps people navigate the emotional and spiritual side of the diagnosis, and we'll learn more about that. But she does so alongside the logistics, helping support not just the body, but the mind and the soul as well. Her work often includes helping people find peace, helping them process what might feel unfinished, and even helping them create a meaningful legacy plan that can ease the burden for their loved ones. Now, in addition to her work as a death doula, Aisha also serves as a pre-need planning specialist at Beck Funeral Homes. And there she helps individuals and families think through and document their end of life wishes, including any, burial or cremation plans, as well as other important decisions. Because she does work so closely with families every day, she has a really deep understanding of what people need most in these moments and what can make the process feel more manageable and supported. Now, we're incredibly lucky to have Aisha with us today. And before I hand it off to her, I just want to provide a quick note on the format for today. So the presentation will last about 30 minutes. And what we'll do is, as you've noticed, we're currently recording the session so that, if any members couldn't join, they can listen to the recap. But what we'll do is that at the end of the 30 minutes, we'll stop the recording and just make it a free Q&A so that you can truly ask, any questions you may have so that we can make sure we're respecting your privacy and that you can truly ask freely. So with that, Aisha, thank you so much for being here. I'll hand it over to you.
Veronica, thank you. And just thank you for the invitation and all of the kind words and just being open and receptive to what we do and just really allowing me to be here today. First, I want to thank everyone for joining. I know it's a very important but hard conversation. And so I wanted to share a little bit about how a death doula can help with more of a compassionate transition. I always like to explain that people most often aren't aware of what a doula is. They think a doula is generally dealt with childbirth, and that is true. Most doulas, there are midwives that are birth doulas. I am actually specializing in the opposite end. I'm actually a death doula. And so I like to say end of life doula or life changing support companion, just different things to make people be able to accept those words a little bit easier. What I like to explain about the doula is that it's kind of a full spectrum. What it does is it allows us to gap between the medical providers and the actual family members and the patient. I grew up on a family, and I think Veronica might have a slide, on a family compound where my grandparents, before I get too far into it, let me go back one second and start with the agenda. So just so you know, I've kind of started already, but I'm going to go over my background. Then I'm going to say what a death doula actually does, doulas versus hospice and how we collaborate together, key concerns to bring on for a death doula, and then our Q&A. And so I'm sorry if I forgot to go into the agenda. I was too excited about killing my background. But ultimately, I grew up on a family compound. and in which that time I had always seen my grandparents and my grandmother especially care for our loved ones. They took care of them all the way through passing, and so as a little child, I always saw and taught that you cared for the physical body. I didn't realize until later on when I look back that as my uncle and grandfather had these long term illnesses, my grandmother, especially, she lived in unspoken grief, right? There was just this let me continue, let me thrive, let me take on. If you'll go to the next slide. And so she actually was the main caregiver for my uncle, my grandfather, and then other uncles and family members. And in this picture, it's my mom and aunt and I, and we were basically the support family, right? So she was the main caregiver, and we supported our family. Well, in next slide, in 2019, after all of these, other illnesses and long term things that we had cared for, my brother, who was basically 39 at the time, he was not married, no children, very much lived an active, very active lifestyle. And he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Literally, when the doctor told him he had 6 months to live, he circled that date on his calendar and he died exactly 6 months to the date. What we found is that for me, it was a realization that we are much more than the physical body. In all those other instances, we had time and we watched the physical body change and we never dealt with the grief. Seeing my brother, he went directly from shock to acceptance and he was ready to die, to where he basically reclused himself and decided that he was not going to do anything. He was just going to let himself die. And then by the time that his mindset changed by all of our support, by all of our belief, by all of our love, his physical body could no longer withstand any additional thing that he wanted to do in the future. So his mindset delayed his physical processing because he could not accept where he was at that time. Right. And so it was a real eye opener that we are truly three parts. We have a mind, a body, and a spirit. Our mind, without a doubt, controls the physical body. Our body might have actual things that it does naturally on its own, but the actual movement, the things that we do, the inner feeling comes from our mindset. That is supported then by our spiritual. I explain to people that you don't have to have a faith, but in order for us to have connection between people, we have to be more than a body and a mind, right? There has to be something other, and I call that spirit. That's the way that I connect with you. That's the way you connect with me. That's the way we have things in common. That's the way that life grows in those relationships. And so what happens often is that hospice, a wonderful, wonderful service, treats the body, but we're not always treating the mind or the spirit. And so we're basically leaving these other parts out that a non-medical professional can provide. I can come in and give emotional, spiritual, and practical support, all while navigating all of this between the patient and the family. Um, so I guess that's a little bit about my introduction and kind of how I became a doula. But in regards to what I do, so well, there's kind of a few stages. Yep. So this is my brother, and so that was the big difference. And although he looked 7 months pregnant, he actually had 22 pounds of cancer. And this is after them doing a debulking surgery in which they removed 11 pounds. And so he still was with 11 pounds. But unfortunately, it would be just days after this that he would actually pass. Unfortunately, he obtained sepsis during the surgery and then, of course, passed from then. For me, it was a real eye opener to grief and the reality of that we don't start grieving at the moment in which we lose a person, or even our patient starts grieving at the moment of which they receive the notice of life change. With that life change, there brings all of those different stages of grief and inability to deal right with what's maybe going on with them physically. So by having a death doula, what I do is I come in with practical knowledge and advice. I help with creating the proper paperwork, getting all of their wishes, advanced care, and healthcare documents in order. I can assist them with personalizing their funeral benefits and especially informing their families of what they want. I've often shared that my dad was ill and he knew he was going to pass. And instead of him prepping everything, every now and then he would throw out, when I die, I want to wear my military uniform. When I die, the military is going to pay for it. Having no idea that one, the military does not pay for your funeral in full. And two, he had not worn his uniform in 30 years. That thing did not fit him. Right. And so people don't always think about those practical things because they're too caught in their emotion. I like to everybody, when I come in, I get to be with the patient, but I get to also be completely open and honest. So we build a relationship that allows for them to have these conversations with me, to talk over things. People often say, well, hospice has a chaplain. They do, but hospice also has a large caseload, and they also have actual cases and things that they have to do. So their time is limited. Where for me, I can spend as little or as much time as the patient needs, and really just kind of supporting them in those different ways. I help people create legacy projects. People always think that legacy means that you mean leave your family money, and no, that's not always the case. A lot of times, a legacy can be a family name. It can be heirlooms, things that you've passed down from family member to family member. It can be unique keepsakes, letters. All different things can be what a family considers to be part of that loved one's legacy, right? It's not always the physical portion. I also go over with them once I find kind of their stage of grief, like what level of they're at, help them to transition to a place where we can be at peace and make better decisions when we're in that state than when we are in some sort of grief where it's not being identified. By doing that, we're able to then plan their actual passing. Do you want music? Do you want a certain smell? Who do you want present? Are there certain things that you want that we can provide to help create that space? When it comes time to the actual active death or active dying, I am at their bedside presence. I help the family kind of take breaks, or if they're, worked up, things are going on, I usually allow them to take their breaks so that I can be with the loved one and with them basically all the way through passing. And that looks different for different people, right? And so it's always just different compared to what that person needs. But generally, there's always some sort of family type space, right? There's always some sort of smell that goes on. And like I have said before, no one wants to die alone. And so, really having somebody there is hugely important. Unfortunately, hospice can't always be there at time of passing, right? They'll try to do what they can. They come and they fill in. But basically, we get to bridge that gap, right? We get to be the filler. I often tell people that the chaplain will come in and see someone and visit with them. But again, they're going back to their caseload, where I can come in with someone, be completely honest. I share my good, bad, and ugly as well, right? Because we all have that, and create a relationship in which that individual feels open enough to share the things with me, share those fears, share the things that we're not able to address. And sometimes you just don't even want your family members to know because you carry guilt or shame. You've never dealt with it. Now you're not sure how they're going to accept it. So being able to talk through things with people, and then even giving them tools so that they can have the conversation with their family. Or if they feel better, I'll have the conversation with their family. Being able to show up when families can't, and checking on their loved one, right? There's often when I see things at the facilities or where I might be seeing the patient that others don't see because they're not there all the time, right? I have some families that choose to allow me to kind of be the contact person. And I will say that I've had some people go off hospice, which has been awesome, really funny too, because it just shows how much truly we need sometimes of individual care. And that doesn't only mean our physical body, but that means that somebody's caring about our mind and our body and our spirit, and that we're getting all the things that we need. And I really come at them with kind of offering all different types of, resources and things. I've painted with people, I've sewn with people, right? Whatever, what shows with people, we've journaled. Everyone has their own different thing that helps them get to where they need to be. I had a guy that was a woodworker, so I brought him a little wood tool and was like, hey, let's do some wood, right? So it's just about creating a bond and really being able to allow someone to open up their vulnerability to bring them to a place of peace. Um, The practical logistics of it all. People always ask, when do you hire a doula and when is it too late? I always tell everybody, obviously, after passing is too late. But really, anytime. I love to meet people when they receive their diagnosis or when they're first just, having these life changing events, because there's all types of practical things that happen. So not only are you changing your physical day, but a lot of times you're changing your work life. You're changing the way that you may have spent money. You're changing the way you or the way you eat. You're changing all of the other aspects. And so I help people come in and create a practical, life routine, basically recreate their routine, and then us then take a picture of what the future looks like and help them to get their best means possible, right? And so with that, I always tell people it's never too early to hire us. But I generally like to come in, like I said, at diagnosis all the way up through prior to passing, a couple weeks if we could, because it allows the person to give them their processing time, right? People process emotions differently. And so not everybody's going to be there in the last 3 days, right? Not everyone is going to have a peaceful passing. And so the sooner that we can really help people to come to peace, the easier it really is for them to move forward. I will say that it is a private pay. Being a doula is not yet covered by insurance, although it's very important. We know that mental health is just barely a new, thing that we're addressing now, as something that may have always been an issue for us, right? Our mental health is basically the processing of our brain, right? Our brain's healthiness. And so, although we never really have addressed it before, more and more we're seeing that the brain is a huge part of our physical body, right? So, the mental processing as well as the spiritual. So, although doulas are not an insurance available product, we're hoping that as more and more people get to use us and more people see the benefit, then of course in the future it will be insured. Right now, I charge a rate, basically, and that's what all doulas do across the board. On average, it ranges anywhere from $50 to $300 an hour. Or in some cases, I have a whole flat fee. So if a family says, "Hey, I want you to be here for the next 3 months," right? And we set out a schedule and I'll be there all the way through the end. And then we just set a flat fee. That's kind of like one of the things I've talked to Veronica about. I've never had an instance where I've told somebody no, never had an instance where I chose not to help someone, and never went back and collected on people that have passed. Like, I just am not going to go to somebody's family and say, "Hey, by the way," that's not the goal, right? The goal is really to be a pathway to peace. Seeing my brother's transition and how he went from just so many different emotions, that could have really probably changed his outcome, right? But because he took in what somebody else told him, that he had 6 months, that was the date in his mind, and so therefore everything that came from that followed that. And so by helping people to realize, okay, is it practical that you can go into remission? If not, okay, what does death look like for you? Right? And what do you want to have done before that happens? And being able to share with people. I think I've said before, I've had people that have started to journal. And so they were able to leave that to their loved one. And now their loved one has a journal that they can read often. Someone's planned their services by picking all the music. And that gave comfort to the family because they said, "Did you know he picked these songs? He was the one that picked." And so having comfort in your passing gives your loved ones comfort. And ultimately, if the goal is for us to be there, we should want it to be the best possible, right? We should want to reach that finish line with all glory and not in suffering, because I feel like we suffered enough through our actual life. But I generally like to say that we like to move you from a place of fear into a place of peace, where we're really able to support not only the individual, but the family, and really provide something that they probably never have had before. I think that I'm actually a little bit of ahead of schedule because I talk so fast. But Veronica, I think you had some questions for me before I actually get started into the question and answer.
Yeah, yeah. So I did have some questions for this one before we jump into the Q&A, just because I imagine it's on a lot of our minds and I want to make sure it's captured. And I think one of them, for those that aren't familiar with my story, like my dad was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, terminal from the beginning, ultimately passed. And, in our case, I wish we had used hospice. Hospice is a fantastic resource, and now that I've learned all about it, I can truly say it's wonderful, but we never used it because psychologically there was this belief, or at least maybe it was my family's or my dad's, but I think I've spoken to enough people that this seems to be a recurring theme that like in his mind using hospice was kind of the equivalent of like I'm either giving up or I'm accepting that I'm dying. And he was just fighting so hard to live, to stay with us that, like, despite, my mom was a caregiver, she could really use the help. We could have used the help. We didn't really know what we were doing, but like, we just simply couldn't get around to him wanting to use it. And I imagine maybe death doulas might experience similar pushback from family members in the sense that, maybe it's associated, like if I bring in a death doula, it means that I've accepted it or I'm not fighting. So I guess I'm just curious on like, how would you approach a family member that might be in a similar stage or that might feel like maybe bringing on this type of support could be associated with like giving up or something like that?
No, absolutely. So I generally don't walk in and say, hello, hey, I'm your death doula. Um, I really just ask for an introduction. Like, let me meet your loved one. Let us have a conversation. Generally, people will feel when I come in that I am authentic. I'm just gonna make me upset, but I'm a cry because I'm at a point in my life where I really don't work for money. I work really to help others, right? Like I'm at a point where the most important thing is that someone doesn't experience grief the way that I experienced grief. And so if I can show up to a family and be authentic and open, generally the person that I'm visiting with makes a connection with me before they actually know what my title is. And so I always ask a family, just let me meet with them. Just let us have a conversation. Let me visit them at the hospital, at home, wherever that might be. And then that individual and I, what they will feel how I am, that I'm open, that I care, that I'm showing up for them. And then they generally are open to me. And then, of course, I always, if people are hard with the word death, then I just help them, tell them that I'm helping them through their life change. I'm just your life change companion. And we're going to go through this, but we're going to go through this together. I think I've shared with you before is one of the things I always have my patients do, unless they're in the hospital and they can't change. But if I'm visiting them at home or we're visiting out, I always ask that they dress for me. I dress for them and they dress for me. And so it's like we connect because we're doing something towards each other. I had patients where I'd show up and he'd be in his pajamas or she'd be in her pajamas and I'd be dressed and I'm like, okay, well, am I making an effort today or is it just? And so when people start seeing that, as long as you're making efforts in your life and moving forward, then you can also do those other difficult things like acceptance, like being able to process certain things because you're doing the little stuff. I once heard like if you make your bed every day, that's the first thing you check off your list. Well, it's essentially that, right? They're not always making their bed, but they can get up and get dressed. We can sit together. We can have conversations. And like I said, I really work to get to know each person individually and work with what's best for that person. Thankfully, I do know several faiths and I am very well read. I like to read. I like to, and so I'm pretty much open to each person and what they specifically need. And then really once the family meets me, then it just kind of goes from there. And then usually I hear people say, oh, that's the lady. That's the lady that was with him when he was sick. That's the lady. So a lot of times they don't even call me a death doula. They just say that's the lady. That's what I have found. But really, like I tell everybody, it's about showing up. It's about being authentic and it's about truly being vulnerable, right? Like I'm not showing up perfect. I've gone through grief. I've had a lot of losses. There were lots of things I did not do well. So I hope that I can help others to not suffer in the way that I did. Right. And what I also try to do is educate people. The biggest thing that people don't realize is that hospice, yes, for years and years and years, it was only end of life care. It was someplace that you went the last 5 to 3 days prior to passing, right? Very rarely was it longer than that. In the last, say, 10 to 15 years, hospice has really transitioned, and basically they not only offer end of life care, but they offer two other types of care. The first is what's called respite. That's something that my grandmother probably could have used. So when you have a patient who has a diagnosis, say of Alzheimer's or dementia, or like my uncle had Down syndrome and he was reversing in time, those illnesses can be covered by hospice, and you can get what's called respite care. So that means when that individual that cares for you, the family member, is worn out and can't take anymore, they can have a break. They can have somebody who's trained, who's medically able to come in and help that family. The other thing they offer is what's called palliative care. Palliative care means that they're going to care for you on the regular basis. So they're going to come in 2 times a week to make sure that your vitals are okay. And so they're also an additional support to the family. So where hospice at one time was only these entities where you went for passing, now it's really expanded and they're offering other types of care. So a lot of times it's educating the family that hospice can actually be a support to you. If you're getting the palliative care, if you're getting the respite care, they can actually be a support to you long before your patient passes. A lot of people with mental health issues, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, they tend to live for a very long time under that diagnosis. Even if they had to go into a home and be under Medicare services, Medicaid, things of that nature, hospice can still be a service provider to them. So those are benefits that you can still receive even if you are on government insurance. And so it's a real true benefit to families. And a lot of people just don't know that they've expanded in that way. And so, again, just being a resource, educating, helping families, being a guide, guiding them to good grief so they know how to find the specialists that they need, right? I see Vicky's on here, forwarding people to grief recovery so that they can then help with support of their grief. Just being a resource and showing up for people in a way that I tell people everybody wants to run out at this time. I'm the person that runs in.
I love that. And one other question for you, Aisha, before I open it up, is I know that a lot of this work is in person, not necessarily virtual, and probably rightly so, given the nature and sensitivity of it. I know you've trained a lot of death doulas. Obviously, you're fantastic at what you do. But if someone, wasn't local to Austin and maybe is looking to hire someone and is in a different state, what do you recommend are things that like they either ask or consider or be thorough about when you're trying to find a death doula who might be a good fit? And it could be as simple as like maybe connecting with you and the family, but I'm curious if there are any things to ask or things to look out for when you're trying to find a death doula.
So there is two things. There's an international end of life doula association. INELDA is what it's called. So you can find a doula pretty much anywhere internationally. I always say that it's important that you find someone that connects with the patient, right? Like I don't want to ever meet with somebody and just go through the motions and go through a checklist. Oh, he's in anger. Check. Let me get him to that. Right. Like I want us to have a connection, and I want people to be able to open up. And so if you meet with someone and the family's not comfortable or the patient's not comfortable, go to the next, right? Like you have to have a comfort level across the board in order for it to really work, right? Because if you don't have buy-in by the patient or the family, then you're never going to have change. And so that's why I always say I like to meet with them, because I've never had anybody tell me no once we're visiting, right? But I'm very open and honest about my own everything. And so I think that that's also bringing comfort. Doulas have started out more often now than ever, right? There's more of us than ever. But I always tell families really, really see that it's a person that you connect with. If you're big on your faith practices, ask them some faith questions, right? Are they going to steer you the right way with your faith? Or are they going to say, no, 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 this is how I always do it, right? Because I have people that say, no, this is, and it's never the same. Everyone's different. I would also ask people, like their actual, kind of education and how often have they done this and those types of things to get your comfort level. It's very important. The most important part is to be comfortable, right? If you're not going to be comfortable from the beginning, you're never going to want to open up. And the goal is to have a person be completely open so that when it comes to our time of death, we're at peace.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right, now
Awesome.
my last thing before I open it up, we'll also share this in the video notes so that you have Aisha's contact info, and I'll also put it in the recap, but sharing this for your reference.